He likes to talk. It's not ego. It's distraction. Fight smart. He came ready. Smart and ready. Today on the Comic Book Report, Batman Under the Red Hood. Stick around and check it out. Greetings from Gotham, everyone. My name is Dominic, and you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today, we're finally taking a look at Batman Under the Red Hood. Frankly, this was a fun read that I've always enjoyed in the past, but the reason I'm reviewing it now is because it's become one of my most requested videos. So I dusted off my old trade paperback, gave it a reread, and now I've prepared a review for you. I hope it doesn't disappoint. Let's get started. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Judd Winick and penciled primarily by Doug Mahnke. The issues of the Red Hood storyline in this volume were published by DC Comics beginning in 2004. The volume itself collects Batman issues 635 through 641 and issues 645 through 650. Also, this volume includes the Batman Annual, number 25, and it has some material from Batman issue 618, which is of course part of the Batman Hush storyline. And finally, this trade paperback comes in at 384 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, at long last, I am finally taking a look at Batman Under the Red Hood. This is my trade paperback copy that I've had for some time. I believe that this specific trade paperback is still in print as of the time of this recording. It is a standard size paperback with nice glossy print pages from none other than DC Comics, of course. As I mentioned at the top of the video, this is one of my most requested videos, especially because I like to do a lot of Batman videos. He's my favorite DC Comics character, and I've had a handful of people essentially ask, when are you going to get to Under the Red Hood? Well, that day's today. And after we take one last look at this back cover that includes a picture of Red Hood, we can go ahead and transition into the book proper. So let's dive in. A few things I want to note. This is a trade paperback collection, but it does collect issues from the Batman series of comic books, meaning that this was part of an ongoing Batman run. However, I do think that this can fairly stand alone by itself as a nice graphic novel, provided you're aware of a couple key things. The first being that once upon a time, Batman had a second Robin after Dick Grayson by the name of Jason Todd. He was a little bit edgier and ultimately was murdered at the hands of the Joker with a crowbar in a just vicious scene within the storyline Death in the Family. Another key thing to note is that Batman thought for a moment he saw a resurrected older Jason Todd when he fought against Clayface in Batman Hush, which I believe was published about a year before this storyline here. Beyond these two things, a couple other things to note is that this takes place after Infinite Crisis, and Infinite Crisis does have a direct bearing on this storyline. However, I don't believe you need to read it whatsoever. The Batman Annual included at the end of this collection helps you fill in the gaps if you did not read Infinite Crisis. Additionally, we also have some notes at the beginning of this collection where we find out that Black Mask essentially killed Stephanie Brown, which herself was a Robin briefly. That kind of sets the stage for what happens in this volume Under the Red Hood. But again, there are a couple key details that once you know those, this book can pretty much stand alone, but it is absolutely enriched if you read some of those previous stories or at least understand a brief synopsis of what occurred before. As far as the storyline here goes, it starts off with a bang, basically in medias res, where Batman is fighting through the air with the villainous Red Hood. Batman is shortly unmasked before Red Hood unmasks himself. Bruce Wayne looks on in horror, but before we as the reader find out what he's looking at, the scene goes back a couple weeks to set up the stage for this crazy battle. To that end, we pick up weeks earlier, where there's a new player in town in the underworld of Gotham City, going by the name Red Hood. we have this really great scene where a lot of the organized criminals, drug runners, drug pushers in Gotham City are all meeting up in some sketchy abandoned warehouse, and they're having conversations amongst themselves, trying to figure out who called this meeting. When they discover that no one present actually called the meeting, Red Hood reveals himself above them and drops a duffel bag onto the table. He makes demands, basically saying, you can't sell drugs to schools or to kids anymore, and 40% of your money now belongs to me. And they are just laughing at him, ridiculing him, saying, why should we? They open up the duffel bag to find the heads of all of the drug lieutenants in their various organizations. So Red Hood becomes an immediate key player within the Gotham underworld, trying to rival Black Mask, who is the current underworld kingpin of Gotham City. After that happens, we have Black Mask amassing his next criminal moves and shipments from the shipyard. He employs Mr. Freeze to kind of be a strongman for him to ensure his shipments come in properly. And we have Batman trying to stop these shipments he's been alerted of. Along the way, Nightwing, Dick Grayson, joins Batman, who is still grieving the loss of Stephanie Brown. He's alienated himself from a lot of the other Bat family members, and so Nightwing teams up with him, and they try to go to the dock to figure out what's going on with this shipment. They uncover an Amazo, which is kind of a cyborg or robot creature that has all these powers from the Justice League members. Dick Grayson and Batman are able to stop this Amazo before realizing that Red Hood is hijacking the shipment from Black Mask, which, among other things, including various weapons used by Batman's Rogues Gallery, we find that Red Hood actually has over 100 pounds of kryptonite, which was Black Mask's ultimate goal with this shipment. At this point, there's various battles and tensions and things rising between particularly Red Hood and Black Mask, as he's kind of vying for a seat at the underworld table, apparently, or is trying to ultimately undo Black Mask's reign on Gotham. As a reader, we're a little bit confused by this Red Hood figure, who is positioned as a brutal villain who is murdering all sorts of street scum, but then by the midpoint you're kind of unsure, is this guy truly an evil mastermind, or is he something more akin to the Punisher over at the Marvel Universe, who is willing to use lethal force when necessary, air quotes. At any rate, Batman comes into the crosshairs of Red Hood a few times, being often outsmarted, or if not outsmarted, outdone in certain ways. Red Hood seems to have weapons that can cut through Batman's materials, his armor, things like that. He knows Batman's movements. He's able to do so many counters, and it leaves Batman a little breathless. Another subplot that happens around this time is Batman starts to interview people amongst his peer group who have kind of come back from the dead. People like Superman, people like Green Arrow, who themselves have been apparently resurrected. And every time he does these different interviews, and there are more, they're all questioning, you already know this information, why are you asking us? As if Batman is trying to keep himself in a state of denial with what he suspects is happening here. And we're, as the reader, essentially led to believe that Batman suspects that this Red Hood is none other than his dearly deceased Robin 2, Jason Todd. In many ways, the plot accelerates from there. Batman and Alfred do tests on Jason Todd's coffin when it's revealed to be empty. They do all of these other ventures. Ultimately, we flash forward to that fight we saw in the beginning where Bruce Wayne is unmasked and he looks over as Red Hood removes his mask, of course revealing that he is in fact Jason Todd, returned from the dead. From that point, we have some battles where Red Hood and Batman actually team up to fight even worse villains, until they ultimately come back to a head against each other. There are other subplots, character interactions, and scenes I'm glossing over for the sake of time on this review, but suffice it to say, it's a great collection that I highly recommend reading. But going back to the plot, everything kind of culminates with Batman coming across Red Hood, his ultimate goal realized as he's kidnapped the Joker. Batman shows up and basically Jason Todd, Red Hood, has Joker at gunpoint saying, I forgive you for letting me die or not being able to save me, but why in the world is Joker still alive? Why was I not avenged? He's not even hurt that Batman could not stop the Joker. He's forgiven that. He can't forgive that Joker, after killing countless people, has been left alive, especially after he murdered Robin. Red Hood then gives a horrible ultimatum to Batman. Either Batman kills Joker by shooting him in the head, or he has to kill Red Hood. Otherwise, Red Hood is going to kill the Joker in front of Batman. And Red Hood basically says, choose, it's happening right now. And Batman, of course, chooses hidden option 3 by instantly incapacitating Red Hood, knocking him unconscious in a pool of blood. Joker kind of gets away and sets off a bomb. The whole building goes up, and you're not really sure what happened. Presumably everyone escapes, but that's kind of the end. We have this really tense standoff moment to end the collection, and it's pretty heartbreaking. After that, we're treated to the Batman Annual. This is the thing that incorporates stuff from Infinite Crisis, and it's basically the story of how Jason Todd got resurrected. And it's a little complicated. Suffice it to say that Superboy Prime from Infinite Crisis messed with the borders of reality, and it kind of resurrected Jason Todd, who climbs and crawls and breaks out of his own coffin, buried alive, and makes his way out. He's in kind of a fugue state with no memories. He's committed to an insane asylum before ultimately Talia al Ghul comes across him and throws him into a Lazarus pit, restoring his memories but driving him a little bit insane. He gets his training back and goes on his quest for vengeance against the Joker and against Batman for allowing Joker to live. We also see how that also leads him to Hush and his brief role he ends up playing in that. And the collection rounds out with the material from Hush, where we find out that Jason Todd was, in fact, part of that storyline, albeit briefly. Wow, that was a mouthful, but that was my bird's eye overview of the plot we can see in Batman Under the Red Hood. As far as the art goes from Doug Mahnke and others, I really loved it. I feel like the art throughout was very consistent. It's a little cartoony for my taste, but overall very strong. He does a really great job of making Gotham City feel like a character. We get to see the kind of grotesque, gritty, criminal, street-level Gotham City, and I enjoyed that. I also like the character design for Red Hood. It's simple but creepy. Even Red Hood itself is kind of a callback to the Joker. You know, see things like the Killing Joke. I mean, that's a really good tip-off that Red Hood is somehow affiliated with something with the Joker. And so I think it was, inevitable that this was Jason Todd, but still just a fantastic story and a great return for this character. I was never an overwhelmingly huge fan of Jason Todd, but I feel like his history is really fascinating, especially Death in the Family. That's a story arc by Jim Starlin that I really should review sometime on the channel. For those that haven't read it, that's the storyline that has to do with the death of Jason Todd, and I believe he was killed off after a vote from fans to let Robin die, which is just horrible. At any rate, it's a classic story, and I love that this is kind of a continuation of that character's story. That and Hush ultimately leads into this story arc. It's sort of an interesting little unofficial trilogy in many ways, but I think that this was a fantastic return for this character, and I loved this kind of edgy, almost villainous, but certainly at least at kind of a Punisher level character arc. And I love seeing that in the Bat family. I love seeing the kind of restoration and reconciliation and tension and not reconciliation throughout the character's future from this point onward with Batman and the rest of the Bat family. Jason Todd is certainly an interesting character. I think he's more interesting since coming back as Red Hood. I've dabbled with some of his series after this point, but this is maybe my favorite Jason Todd story. I'm sure it is for many others as well. I don't know that I mention it much on this channel, but I'm also a very big fan of the DC animated universe, and the DC animated movie adaptation of this story arc I think is among one of my favorite Batman animated movies. It's fantastic. Red Hood is voiced by Jensen Ackles of Supernatural fame. If you enjoy animated movies and you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend that adaptation of this, especially if you enjoy the comic. And I think the converse is also true. If you've seen the movie but haven't read this, I think that there's a lot to love in this comic book. It really enriches the experience, and I think that it was overall really well adapted. Reading this story also really makes me wish we had more omnibuses from this era of Batman. I have not read much around this era other than Batman Hush. Maybe there are omnibuses or larger collections that exist that I'm unaware of. For bigger Batman fans out there than myself, I'd love to hear about it in the comments if you know of any collected editions around this era, particularly omnibus, because I love this style, I love this vibe. I also really enjoyed Batman Hush, which I also reviewed on my channel not too long ago, and the fact that this came out within about a year of that makes me think that, wow, what a cool era for Batman, the early 2000s. As far as who can read this book, like I said in the beginning, I believe that this can more or less stand alone as a graphic novel if you want to treat it like that, barring you know a bit about the death of Jason Todd. But it's a fantastic story, it's a fun kind of action, thriller, mystery, and I think that there's a lot of good character work we see here. Obviously, yes, for Jason Todd, but it's a really cool showcasing of Black Mask, and I love what it does with Batman and Alfred as they try to deal with things like failure, the past coming back to haunt them, and trying to figure out what is really happening with the world. We see a lot of doubt in Batman. We see him almost, if not knowing what's really going on, being unwilling to accept the fact that he believes this is Jason Todd. And that kind of doubt, that kind of fear is really interesting to see in the character of Batman. I don't feel like it's always explored or exploited in the way we see here. And that really makes this such a standout Batman read for me, in my opinion. I think a book that shows me a new side of Batman that feels authentic but is new is always worth calling out. And I think for me, one of the biggest standout moments for Batman in this collection that makes it a must-read for me is the fact that we see Batman grapple so much with doubt and almost fear, wondering about, is this Jason Todd? What happens here? And how layered that is with his own sense of shame, failure, and what is happening. I also love that this brought in a lot of other DC characters that I didn't super expect. We had things, like I said, appearances from Superman, from Green Arrow, Zatanna came into this, Jason Blood came into this. I loved that they showcased Mr. Freeze for a while as an almost henchman to Black Mask. That was a really interesting position for Mr. Freeze to be in my opinion, but I think it worked as almost kind of a tough guy enforcer. We also had some other villains throughout this that were interesting. Some other Bat family members were mentioned. Overall, a very fun story arc that just brought in a lot of great characters. I think the writer Judd Winick also did a really great job of kind of comparing, contrasting Nightwing, Dick Grayson, with Red Hood, Jason Todd, as well as Stephanie Brown, the Robin who has most recently died. She will go on to be, spoiler, she's alive later on in the continuity. I'm not really sure what happened there. But her presence, even though she's not physically present in this book, is very much felt throughout, especially in the beginning. And that we can contrast with Stephanie Brown and Jason Todd, the loss of a Robin and the failures there. But we can also compare with Dick Grayson and Jason Todd, like what a Robin should be, what a Robin means to Batman, what that relational dynamic is. There's a lot of interesting contrasting work that help define who Red Hood is and help redefine who Jason Todd is. And like I said, I just think it's really well done. I don't think it tries to be overly heady. I don't think it takes itself overly seriously. And frankly, it's a really fast read. I feel like there's small interior monologue boxes, brief dialogue, and a lot of visual art and presentation throughout this. This was, something like a 13 or 14 issue trade paperback, but it read really swiftly. Yes, partially because I was absolutely glued to the storytelling, but also because it just moves swiftly. Like I said, it's more art heavy than text heavy, and it makes it feel very modern. The panel layouts are exciting, clear, and experimental in some ways that just work for the storytelling. If you're a Batman fan, this should definitely be in your library. If you're a fan of any of the Robins or the greater Bat family, this should be in your library. If you're just a DC Comics fan and are trying to decide to get it, I would probably always recommend checking out Under the Red Hood. Maybe it's not for everyone, but it's a memorable chapter in the Batman history, and one worth revisiting for those that maybe have read it, but it's been a while, like myself. And as we transition, now that we've finished the collection proper, I just want to give you a brief look at that unofficial trilogy I mentioned earlier, that being Batman Death in the Family by Jim Starlin, Batman Hush by Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee, and now, of course, Batman Under the Red Hood by Judd Winick. A great unofficial trilogy of books, particularly for all the Jason Todd Red Hood fans out there. These are must-reads. I reviewed Hush on my channel earlier. Let me know if you want Death in the Family. Now all that's left is to give this collection a grade. It should be no surprise, after reinventing a lost Batman character, coupled with great art throughout and riveting storytelling, that the Comic Book Report would give Batman Under the Red Hood an A. This is a must-read portion of Batman's canon, particularly if you're a fan of the Robins and Bat family, but in general a fantastic book that largely stands alone as a great little graphic novel story. And for fans of this storyline and comic, I also highly recommend the DC animated adaptation, Batman Under the Red Hood. Have you read Under the Red Hood? Let me know in the comments below what you think of this work. And a big thank you to all of you who reached out requesting this review. I was happy to reread and revisit this classic Batman story, and I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Thank you so much for stopping by. Please don't forget to give this video a like and leave me a comment. And until next time, have a good one.